Dave Miller was a perfectly average office worker in every conceivable way. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, his tie marginally askew, and his expression perpetually caught somewhere between boredom and mild contentment. Every day at precisely 12:30 p.m., he would meander to the same park bench, unwrap his predictably mundane sandwich, and spend exactly 45 minutes doing absolutely nothing of consequence. Today was no different. Dave settled onto his favorite wooden bench, the one with the slightly uneven slat that made him shift his weight every few minutes. He pulled out a half-eaten baguette from yesterday, breaking off small pieces and tossing them to the gathering pigeons. His gaze drifted lazily across the park, not focusing on anything in particular. A perfectly unremarkable man performing a perfectly unremarkable routine. Unknown to Dave, approximately 372 million miles above his head, lurking just beyond the orbit of Mars, the Supreme Glorban Empire's 7th Scout Fleet had arrived. The Glorbans were an ancient civilization, proud of their technological supremacy and military prowess. Their race had evolved from crystalline-based life forms, developing into a rigid, logical species that prized efficiency and precision above all else. Their physical form resembled towering, translucent humanoids with fractal patterns dancing beneath their surface, refracting light in mesmerizing, constantly shifting patterns. High Commander Zex Tylan stood on the command deck, his crystalline form pulsing with the subtle blue hue that indicated deep concentration. The Glorbans had conquered 17 star systems in the last solar cycle alone, each victory meticulously planned and flawlessly executed. Their military doctrine was built on a foundation of absolute information superiority. They never engaged an enemy they didn't thoroughly understand. Status report on the preliminary scan of the third planet, Zex Tylan demanded, his voice resonating through the ship's atmosphere like vibrating crystal. Science Officer Kixenear's form flickered with green anxiety patterns as she responded. The Eternal Eye has completed its initial assessment, High Commander. The planet appears to be inhabited by primitive carbon-based life forms, largely concentrated in rudimentary structural clusters. Their technology is disappointingly basic. Then why? Zex Tylan's tone cooled to a dangerous temperature, causing nearby officers to dim their internal light in submission. Has the Eternal Eye flagged this system as potentially problematic? The science officer's patterns shifted uneasily. The system has identified an anomaly, sir. A single biological entity displaying behaviors that register as inexplicable. Zex Tylan moved closer to the holographic display, his translucent form intensifying with interest. Inexplicable? The Eternal Eye does not flag behaviors as inexplicable without cause. Elaborate. The entity appears to be deliberately maintaining a state of physical inactivity in a public gathering space. It is engaging in low-energy, ritualistic interactions with the indigenous avian species. The Eternal Eye cannot determine a logical purpose for this behavior. The command deck fell silent. In Glorban society, every action served a purpose: conservation of energy, acquisition of resources, strategic advantage, or reproduction. The concept of sitting for no apparent reason was not merely foreign. It was incomprehensible. Show me. The display zoomed in, focusing on a small green area within a densely populated urban center. Further magnification revealed a solitary human figure seated on a primitive wooden structure, occasionally tossing small objects to flying creatures. Enhance the biological readings, Zex Tylan ordered. The display shifted to show heat signatures and basic biological functions. The human's heart rate was steady, brain activity minimal by Glorban standards, muscle tension low. "What is it doing?" asked Weapons Officer Krovtor, his crystalline form pulsing with confused purple patterns. "Our analysis is inconclusive," Kixenear admitted. "It appears to be existing in a state of deliberate non-action." "Impossible," declared strategic analyst Voxbrell, approaching the display. "All sentient beings act with purpose. This must be a form of deception, perhaps a military camouflage technique." Scan for concealed weapons or technology, Zextilan ordered. Moments later, Kixanar reported back. No significant technology detected beyond a primitive communication device. No weapons. No defensive systems. Could it be some form of advanced combat meditation? Suggested Krovtor. Perhaps preparing its neurological systems for battle? Or worse, Voxbrell's voice dropped to a whisper that sent harmonic vibrations through the deck. Could it represent a form of existence that transcends our understanding of logic itself? The High Commander's form pulsed with a deep crimson, the Glorbin, equivalent of scowl. Elevate threat assessment to cautious observation. Deploy microprobes for detailed analysis. I want to know everything about this entity. What it is, what it's doing, and why it's doing it. As the command echoed through the ship, tiny probes no larger than terrestrial dust motes launched from the fleet, racing toward Earth at sublight speeds. Within minutes, they surrounded Dave Miller, their advanced sensors penetrating his physical form down to the cellular level. Back on the command deck, data began streaming in. Biological analysis complete, reported Kixanar. The entity is designated human, appears to be male, approximately mid-life cycle. Genetic structure disappointingly simplistic. Internal organs functioning at baseline efficiency. Focus on neurological patterns, instructed Zextilan. What is it thinking? Neurological activity is perplexing, High Commander. There appear to be minimal directed thought patterns, yet occasional intense energy spikes when the entity interacts with the avian creatures or adjusts its position. The strategic analyst studied the readings carefully. This inconsistency could indicate sophisticated mental shielding. Perhaps it can selectively activate higher brain functions for specific tasks while maintaining a dormant state to avoid detection. Dave yawned widely, stretching his arms above his head. Alert! The weapons officer's form pulsed with alarm. The entity is displaying its oral cavity and extending its upper appendages. Analysis, barked Zextilan. The science officer's patterns swirled frantically as she processed the incoming data. The oral cavity exposure could be a display of biological weaponry or potentially a method of releasing airborne spores or toxins. The appendage extension increases the entity's physical dimensions by 47%, possibly a dominance display or preparation for kinetic action. Dave checked his watch, frowning slightly at the time. It's activating a device, Krovtor exclaimed. The command deck erupted in a cacophony of crystalline tones as the Glorbin officers reacted. Calm yourselves, commanded Zextilan. Analyze the device. It appears to be a primitive time-keeping mechanism, reported Kixar after a moment. But the entity's facial topography changed upon viewing it, a possible activation of a command network or communication with hidden allies. Dave squinted as the sun emerged from behind a cloud, the bright light causing him to grimace. Energy reaction, shouted an analyst. The entity is responding to increased solar radiation with a facial contraction. It may be absorbing or channeling the energy for unknown purposes. Or, suggested Voxbrell ominously, it's reacting to frequencies our scanners cannot detect. The High Commander's crystalline form darkened with concern. Continue observation. Any action, no matter how seemingly insignificant, must be documented and analyzed. Dave, blissfully unaware of the panic he was causing across the solar system, began whistling a tuneless melody that had been stuck in his head since morning. The jingle from a particularly annoying breakfast cereal commercial. In the Glorbin command ship, sensors detecting the sound waves triggered immediate alarm protocols. The entity is emitting modulated audio patterns, declared the communications officer. Run it through all known code systems, ordered Zextilan. This could be a tactical sonic transmission. After frantic analysis, Kixanar reported, the audio sequence contains no recognizable communication patterns, yet it possesses a mathematical structure too precise to be random. It repeats with slight variations, possibly a sophisticated encryption method, or what? Demanded the High Commander. or a form of auditory weapon designed to create psychological dissonance. The pattern is simultaneously predictable, yet subtly chaotic. It could be designed to gradually erode logical thought processes. Dave's stomach rumbled audibly. "God, I'm hungry," he muttered to himself. The science officer's form pulsed with alarm. Vocal communication detected. Internal biological system announcing a state of energy depletion followed by reference to a deity concept. Translation algorithms suggest it's declaring divine entity. I require energy absorption. This confirms our suspicions, Voxbrell declared. The entity is preparing for a significant energy consumption event, possibly as a precursor to an attack. Zextylan paced the command deck, his crystalline form cycling through patterns of deep thought. The Eternal Eye's threat assessment has increased 3 levels since initial observation began. This makes no logical sense. The entity has performed no overtly aggressive actions, yet our most sophisticated analysis system considers it increasingly dangerous. Perhaps, suggested the strategic analyst carefully, that is precisely what makes it dangerous. We cannot categorize its behavior according to any known pattern. An enemy we cannot understand is an enemy we cannot predict. And an enemy we cannot predict, concluded the High Commander gravely, is an enemy we cannot defeat. The Eternal Eye's central processing core, a quantum crystalline structure capable of predictive analysis that spanned temporal probabilities, began generating increasingly alarming scenarios. Its algorithms, designed to identify threats across the galaxy, were struggling to categorize the seemingly passive human. This very inability to categorize registered as a meta-level threat that the system automatically escalated. As the command staff debated their next steps, Dave Miller, having finished most of his lunch break, felt slightly bored. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his earbuds, plugged them into his phone, and began scrolling through his playlist. Finding a recent hit song with a catchy but obnoxiously repetitive chorus, he pressed play and began unconsciously tapping his foot to the beat. Aboard the Glorban flagship, all hell broke loose. Multiple technological interactions detected, shouted Kixon AR. The entity has deployed neural interface devices and is now accessing a data repository. The display showed Dave inserting the earbuds and tapping on his phone screen. Analysis of the devices, demanded Zextylan. The smaller objects have been placed in direct contact with its auditory sensory organs, bypassing normal sound wave transmission for direct neural interface. The handheld device appears to be transmitting data directly into the entity's brain through this connection. And the rhythmic lower appendage movement? Asked the weapons officer, pointing to Dave's tapping foot. The science officer's form pulsed with distress. It appears to be generating subharmonic vibrations that synchronize with a neural input. The pattern matches no known combat technique, but what? Pressed Zextylan. But it's having an effect on our ship's crystalline structure. The vibrations, when amplified through our observation systems, are creating resonance patterns in our molecular matrix. The High Commander felt it himself now, a subtle, unsettling vibration that seemed to penetrate his very essence. Around the command deck, officers were reporting strange symptoms, logic process disruptions, sensory confusion, and most alarmingly, uncontrollable urges to move their forms in rhythm with the human's foot tapping. This is unprecedented, declared Voxbrell, his usually steady form now wavering erratically. The entity has somehow deployed a multi-vector attack that targets our physical structure, our logical processes, and our behavioral controls simultaneously, all while appearing to do nothing of consequence. The Eternal Eye is now classifying this as an Omega-level passive entity, reported Kixar, her voice resonating with fear, an emotion rarely experienced in Glorban society. It's projecting system-wide command structure collapse within 30 minutes if exposure continues. Around the command deck, several junior officers had already succumbed to the mysterious effect, their crystalline forms pulsating in perfect rhythm with Dave's foot tapping, their logic centers producing nonsensical outputs. Some began emitting harmonic tones that approximated the melody Dave was listening to, despite having no access to the actual audio. High Commander Zex Tylan faced the most difficult decision of his 1,000-year military career. The entity below was deploying weapons technology beyond Glorban understanding. Weapons that required no movement, no technology, and no apparent effort. A being that could inflict damage merely by existing. Tactical options, he demanded. Conventional military response is not recommended. Krovtor responded, his form now noticeably vibrating with the human's rhythm. We cannot predict how the entity would respond to aggression, and the potential for catastrophic escalation is incalculable. Retreat, suggested Kixar. The entity has already affected our systems, countered Vox Burrell. There's no guarantee we could escape its influence radius before complete systems failure. Zex Tylan made his decision. There is only one option. We must attempt communication and appeal to its mercy. A shocked silence fell over the command deck. High Commander Vox Burrell finally spoke. In our 10,000 years of military history, we have never surrendered or appealed for mercy. It contradicts our most fundamental principles. And in those 10,000 years, replied Zex Tylan grimly, we have never encountered an entity capable of disrupting our very existence through apparent inaction. These are unprecedented circumstances. The decision made, the Glorbans activated their most advanced communication technology, a consciousness projection system capable of transmitting thoughts directly into the mind of the target being. The message, crafted with the utmost care to convey complete surrender while maintaining whatever dignity remained, was transmitted directly to Dave Miller. Dave was halfway through the mind-numbingly repetitive chorus of Baby Got Back for the third time when he heard, or thought he heard, a strange voice in his head. Supreme entity of stillness and chaotic sound. We, the Glorban Empire, bow before your immeasurable power. We beg you to cease your assault on the logical structure of the universe. We offer you our fleet, our technology, our homeworld. Please show mercy. Dave paused his music, pulled out one earbud, and looked around in confusion. The park remained normal. Pigeons pecking at breadcrumbs, a couple walking past holding hands, the distant sound of traffic. No one else seemed to have heard the bizarre announcement. Must be some weird new ad thing, he mumbled irritably. Or maybe those guys from marketing pranking me again. He shrugged, replaced his earbud, turned the volume up a notch to drown out any further interruptions, and resumed tapping his foot to the beat. On the Glorban command ship, this response triggered outright panic. The entity has rejected our surrender, cried Kix and AR. It removed its neural interface briefly, scanned its surroundings, then deliberately reactivated the system at increased intensity. This is a final warning, declared Vox Burrell, his form now barely maintaining cohesion. It's demonstrating that it could destroy us at any moment, but chooses to continue the torture. The High Commander's decision was immediate. Initiate emergency warp jump. Maximum distance. Abandon all probes and observation equipment. But High Commander, protested Krovtor weakly, his crystalline form now pulsating with the human's rhythm. Standard protocol requires. There is no protocol for this, roared Zex Tylan. Execute immediately. Throughout the fleet, emergency protocols activated. Ships began disappearing in flashes of light as they jumped to safety, leaving behind only their microscopic probes, which automatically initiated self-destruction sequences, the molecular structures dissolving into undetectable particles. The Eternal Eye, in its final action before the fleet's departure, classified Earth as absolute forbidden zone, existential threat level undefined, and locked the designation with the highest security protocols. No Glorban ship, probe, or transmission would be permitted within 100 light-years of the Sol system without direct authorization from the Supreme Council itself. As the last Glorban ship vanished from the solar system, Dave Miller's phone chimed with a calendar alert. Lunch break over. He turned off his music, stood up, stretched, and tossed the last bit of bread to the waiting pigeons. Brushing crumbs from his lap, he headed back toward his office building, slightly annoyed that his peaceful lunch had been interrupted by what he assumed was either a strange auditory hallucination or an elaborate prank. His mind was already shifting to mundane concerns, the afternoon's meetings, whether he had time to stop for coffee, what he might have for dinner. He had absolutely no idea that he had just saved Earth from potential invasion and become the most feared being in the Glorban Empire simply by sitting still and listening to music. In the weeks that followed, rumors spread through the Intergalactic Intelligence Network. Carefully leaked data and secondhand accounts described an unassuming planet in an unremarkable solar system that housed a being of incomprehensible power, a being that could disrupt the very fabric of reality simply through its passive existence. Several species established safety buffer zones around the Sol system. Others sent highly specialized long-range observation vessels that maintained distances of several light years. A few brave, or foolhardy, civilizations attempted to establish contact with Earth, but approached with ritual offerings and elaborately choreographed displays of submission. In the deepest, most secure vault on the Glorban homeworld, a special file was created. Labeled simply the Miller Entity Incident, it was sealed with the highest security classification and appended with a simple note: never approach. Never analyze. Just stay away. The file contained only fragmentary data, blurry images of a human sitting on a bench, feeding birds, and listening to music, along with the complete logs of the system collapse that had nearly destroyed the 7th Scout Fleet. The Glorban Military Academy added a new principle to its strategic doctrine: true power requires no demonstration. Young cadets were taught that the most dangerous enemies were those who appeared to be doing nothing at all. Dave Miller, meanwhile, continued his unremarkable existence, taking lunch at the same park bench almost every day, weather permitting. Sometimes he brought bread for the pigeons. Sometimes he listened to music. Sometimes he just sat doing nothing in particular, completely unaware that across the galaxy, entire civilizations held their breath whenever he did so. On rare occasions, he would feel a strange sensation, as if someone or something was watching him. He would look around, see nothing unusual, and shrug it off. Just another ordinary day in the life of the most terrifying being in the galaxy. One Tuesday afternoon, a particularly bold alien observation vessel ventured closer than standard protocols allowed. Its advanced cloaking technology made it virtually invisible to Earth's primitive detection systems, but sensors could detect the specific brainwave patterns of the Miller entity from orbit. The alien observers, a species of gaseous sentience known as the Vaporians, had been studying Earth from afar for months. Unlike the Glorbans, they prided themselves on their adaptability and intuitive understanding rather than rigid logic. Their commanding officer, Cloud Commander Wisp, believed the stories of the humans' power were exaggerated, likely a Glorban misinterpretation of some simple biological function. Target acquired, reported the sensor officer, a shifting purple fog contained within a specialized field. The Miller entity is currently in its standard observation location. Excellent, replied Commander Wisp, his voice a melodious whisper through the ship's atmosphere. Initiate full spectrum analysis. Let's solve this mystery once and for all. The ship's sensors focused on Dave, who was sitting on his usual bench, eating a tuna sandwich and scrolling through social media on his phone. Initial readings are consistent with standard human biological functions, reported the science officer. Elevated glucose levels suggesting recent caloric intake, minor dopamine releases corresponding with his interaction with the handheld device. Nothing unusual, noted Commander Wisp with satisfaction. As I suspected, the Glorbans overreacted to— Wait, interrupted the sensor officer. I'm detecting an anomaly. On the bench, Dave had just received a notification. His boss wanted the quarterly report by end of day, not end of week as previously discussed. Dave sighed heavily, closed his eyes, and pinched the bridge of his nose in frustration. Aboard the alien ship, alarms began blaring. Energy surge, shouted the science officer. The entity is manipulating its facial structure while closing its visual sensors and restricting its oxygen intake. Meaning, demanded Commander Wisp. Unknown, but it correlates with a 200% increase in stress hormone production, and the science officer's gaseous form swirled in distress. Commander, our primary systems are experiencing unexplained fluctuations. Ship's atmosphere becoming unstable. Throughout the vessel, the carefully maintained gaseous environment that sustained the Vaporeon crew began to condense unexpectedly, forming droplets on surfaces, the equivalent of a human breaking into a cold sweat. "Impossible," whispered Commander Wisp, his own form beginning to lose cohesion. "We're too far away for any direct influence. The Miller entity is somehow affecting our molecular stability across space," reported the increasingly panicked science officer. "Theory, it's generating some form of quantum entanglement effect that transcends normal physical limitations." On Earth, Dave dropped his phone. "Damn it," he muttered, bending to pick it up. In the Vaporeon ship, chaos erupted. "Extreme positional shift," cried the sensor officer. "The entity is dramatically altering its configuration toward the planetary surface." "Emergency protocols," ordered Commander Wisp as his form began to disperse uncontrollably. "Retreat immediately." The ship activated its emergency drive, creating a small space-time distortion that allowed it to essentially skip several light years away in an instant. As the vessel reappeared in safe space, the crew gradually stabilized, their gaseous forms returning to normal consistency. "Report," demanded Commander Wisp weakly. "Multiple systems failures," responded the engineering officer. "Atmospheric regulation severely compromised. 17 crew members lost molecular cohesion temporarily. But we've survived." "And the Miller entity?" "Our last readings showed it returning to its previous configuration. No pursuit detected." Commander Wisp's form pulsed with relief. "Update the galactic database immediately." The Glorban reports were not exaggerated. "The entity possesses capabilities beyond our comprehension." Back on Earth, Dave finished his sandwich, brushed off his hands, and headed back to the office, mentally preparing for an evening of tedious report compilation. As he walked, he sneezed suddenly and violently. 3 light years away, a passing scout ship from the Andromedan Alliance detected the energy spike from the sneeze and immediately altered course, racing back to their home system with warnings of a potential supernova in the Sol sector. And so it continued. Dave Miller lived his unremarkable life, completely unaware of his galactic reputation. The pigeons in the park grew fat on his breadcrumbs. His quarterly reports were always submitted on time, if occasionally at the last minute. He went on a few dates, none particularly successful. He binged shows on the weekend. He called his mother on Sundays. And across the stars, civilizations monitored him from a respectful distance, building elaborate mythologies around his every mundane action. Religious cults formed, worshiping the one who sits. Military strategists studied grainy footage of him eating lunch, seeking to understand his incomprehensible tactical genius. Philosophers debated whether his apparent inaction was the highest form of action. Years passed. The galactic community gradually adapted to living with the knowledge that somewhere on a small blue planet existed a being of unfathomable power who, for reasons unknown, chose to disguise himself as an ordinary office worker. Some suggested attempting communication again, but most preferred the status quo. After all, as long as the Miller entity remained peacefully on his bench, the galaxy remained safe. Best not to disturb him. Dave Miller eventually got promoted to middle management, moved to a slightly larger apartment, adopted a cat, and continued taking lunch in the park whenever weather permitted. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he would look up at the stars and wonder if there was anyone else out there in the vast universe. Little did he know that thousands of civilizations looked back, holding their breath whenever he did so,